everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andrea. I am a rare book librarian, and today we are joined by my cat Cthulhu. And today I would like to do a reading wrap-up. Without further rambling, let me tell you about the books that I've read and finished. So the first one was Something in the Woods Loves You by Jarod K. Anderson. I think the best way to describe this is both nature journaling and a depression memoir. Anderson starts off by being very deep in academia. He's an aspiring scholar, he's done his master's, he's pursuing a higher degree, and he just wants to write books and essays, and he's very deep in academia. He's surrounded by a lot of people who are very, very ambitious, and there's something about that very competitive nature and atmosphere in academia which almost kills his love for learning and curiosity, which got him in there in the first place, and he falls into a very deep depression. Now, we understand that depression doesn't happen because of one thing, but an accumulation of many other things. But in this memoir, he's kind of having his big fall in the midst of all this. And the rest of the memoir, which is after this introduction, is him picking himself back up and restoring his health and his healing journey. And he does it through nature. And he goes on nature walks. He also gets a partner, and she is amazing. She pushes him to go on nature walks, and at first he even lies to her, sits in his car, and pretends he goes on nature walks until eventually he actually does it. She's kind of a big driving force in his healing process. And every chapter we get a theme. So like, let's say for example, the theme is playfulness. Then he'll tell you about the squirrels, and that will be like the main subject of that chapter. And then he'll tie it back to himself and his life and how that theme fit into, you know, his life or his healing journey. What I really enjoyed about this memoir was how self-aware the author is. There are many moments where you think he's going to build up to this cliche thing and say, you know, something, and then he takes you in a different direction, and he's very grounded and reflective. And because he's, you know, a student in literature, he's very good at making allusions, and you can tell that he's just in love with literature still and in love with nature, and he kind of blends these two together so well in this memoir. Now, upon further research, I found that Anderson also has a YouTube channel and the podcast, so I'm going to link those things down below. But if you just want to go in it like me, the book should be widely available. The next book that I read is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Now, I love Susanna Clarke's writing. Mr. Norrell and Jonathan Strange in high school hit me so hard. Had everything: good language, an intricate magic system, realism at the same time in so many ways, and it was like historical fiction at the same time. So I definitely flagged Susanna Clarke as a must-read author. Everything she puts out, I'm going to read. But when this book came out, I was hesitant to pick it up because of the cover. In the midst of everyone writing and retelling Greek myths and Roman legends and all those things, I thought this was going to be one of those, especially since the cover has this statue of a faun. I honestly thought this was a retelling of the faun from Hercules or something like that. I don't know why I thought that. Obviously, this is on me. But I kind of put it off longer and longer. And then eventually, I kept hearing people speak so highly of it that I just sat down and said, you know, I'm gonna pick this up and read it, because it's a silly reason not to read it. And it was very different from anything I expected. But all I can say is that the first third of the book brought me to such a high that I was prepared to make a whole video just on this book alone, titled Why Piranesi is So Great. Like, it's so amazing. Blew my mind. And then it just tanked, and the reason it tanked was nothing to do with the author, nothing to do with the writing. It builds up this kind of mystery that then starts to be answered, and I personally just didn't like the answers. And this just could be a me thing, but objectively speaking, this book is very well written. The ideas, the setting, just everything about the story is phenomenal. So I'm going to try to explain it as best I can from my own words, but maybe if you read it, you can spin it off differently. There are many other videos out there, I'm sure, of this book because I know it's very popular. So this book starts off in this house, and you get the sense that it's by the sea because there's an albatross that's been visiting, and that's how the journal entries are. The person writing in his journal, who's also the protagonist, is this young man who lives in this house by the sea. And at first you're a little bit confused. You're like, okay, we're by the sea in this unknown house. But there are several corpses around the house, and they've all died at different stages. And this person is taking the world in, and there's something naive about him and childlike, because you get the sense that he doesn't know too many things. He hasn't been outside this house. But this house has multiple rooms. It's a labyrinth in many ways. And he has these journals, and the journal entries are dictated by what happened in that year that was outstanding. So you have, this is the year that the albatross came to visit. And that was the one outstanding thing that year. That's the most exciting thing that's happened. So you have to ponder if you're looking at a character very similar to the child in Emma Donohue's room, where that room is all he knows. And it kind of gives off that vibe for a long time. But then I always have the question about language. Like, how does he know all of these words? Or how does he know what an albatross is? Or in one notebook, he charts the constellations. So there's a lot in there that you have questions about. There's mystery. What does he eat? How does he survive? Where are we? And then as you progress, all of these questions begin to get answered. There is another person known as the Other. We meet another character, and then we have a lot of stories from before and nested stories. But the more you progress, you have more questions, and they do get answered. So it's almost like you have a question in chapter 3, and by chapter 4, questions from chapter 2 have been answered, you know? Something like that. Like, it's beautifully written in that sense. For me, personally, when the questions started being answered, it resembled strongly most of season 4 of Stranger Things, especially the parts in the lab. And I didn't like that answer. And I know it sounds weird, but the first third felt mythical, otherworldly. Like, I even tried to generate some images with AI to see what that house would look like, and the charts and everything else. And I've thought about it so much in the first few days that I was reading, and then I just wasn't really happy with how it unfolded. So I would still give this a very solid 5 stars, because at the end of it all, I kept thinking, like, wow, how do you have an idea like this and then sit down and write it? Like, I don't know how I would even begin if I wanted to remake this book from scratch. I have no idea how she explained this so nicely and beautifully, being the convoluted story it is. And it's highly just moving in so many ways. And I am gonna say that what made me most excited is that I really thought for the first third that this whole book was going to be a prequel to The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and we're gonna learn why the albatross is cursed and why the albatross is able to get to this house and to the mariner. There were some elements of that. To answer my own question from the beginning about the faun, is that in this house there's also a lot of statues, a lot of things that he's cataloging. Because his life is so small and empty in so many ways, it's really fascinating to see what Piranesi connects to as he's trying to understand the world around him and himself. And when he has these instinctive kind of connections to certain corpses or to certain statues or certain pictures or certain rooms, it's kind of interesting to find it all out in the end and wonder, you know, how the connection is so strong. I guess you have to read this to fully be able to discuss it, but I don't want to spoil it, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. The third book I'm going to talk about is very short. It's 100 and something pages, but it's a very teeny tiny book, and it's called The Serviceberry. This is written by Robin Wall Kimmerer. A few years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I made a video about 2 of her other works. Since then, the book Braiding Sweetgrass has been a bestseller. A lot of people love that book very, very much. So this book coming out is definitely going to do well as well, but it's very different. So when she wrote Gathering Moss, it was more like a thesis just on moss and the different types of lichen and mosses out there. And it felt kind of like an in-depth study. Braiding Sweetgrass is a big manifesto. You know, you have this very long text that's in-depth, and it's nature writing, reflective, it's biographical in some ways. It's a mix of so many things. But the Serviceberry, it's short and to the point, and it's almost kind of calling you to action. The Serviceberry's focus is entirely on our economy, and it's making you think strongly about what it would mean for us to return to an exchange or gift economy. So we begin by talking about the Serviceberry, which serves people and animals, and it kind of makes its way through the circular ecosystem where you eat it and then it returns to the land. And it's also serving the entire community with multiple species, not just one person, hence Serviceberry. But the word Serviceberry actually comes from its Latin name, sorbus. So that's just a funny coincidence. But there are other linguistic elements in this book. Like, for example, we learned that in the indigenous language that Kimmerer speaks, the berries always end in the same word, which also means gift, as if it's a gift from the earth. So there are many moments where you learn something new and you are a little bit reflective of nature and the natural world. And she still draws on her expertise in ecology, so that's always beautiful. But she really makes you consider, what does it mean to be in a successful community? Because back in the day, or at least certain cultures, for an individual to be successful, it was not a thing. You are not successful unless your entire community is thriving. It gives the example, you know, if someone were to hunt a buffalo by himself or just with 2 people, they wouldn't just keep it to themselves, eat, and then store away for later. Instead, they would give to the entire community, because if everyone is doing well, then I am doing well. It's kind of seeing the other and yourself as one, instead of how can I alone get to the top and squander the ones at the bottom. And the more in today's economy and the way people work and think, it looks a lot more like everyone's looking out for themselves alone, and in the process disregarding completely the community, the well-being of others, the well-being of children in the future, and ultimately the environment and nature in general, and how kind of thinking more in a circular economy is beneficial, not just for us, but for the entire ecosystem. And she also talks a lot about the idea that in nature, for example, diversity exists in order to not have competition, right? That's why we have diversity in nature. Yeah, very interesting, super calming. I really enjoy reading her works always, so this was no exception. It was just really, really short. Like, you'll fly through this just like that. But it's beautiful. It has all of the elements I love in a book. And now I'm going to talk to you about 3 biographies that I got to wrap up. So I've been working on one of these since August, and that's the biography of Charles Addams. Charles Addams made the cartoon for The New Yorker of the Addams family, which initially started by just having this very thin, kind of creepy looking woman. Initially she had a different husband, but over time she got Gomez and they grew, but they never really had names, and they never really had a lot of words, and you know, they were just kind of vignettes, and people interpreted them because they're kind of morbid, and you could just see that there's this sort of Tim Burton-esque family standing on the beach or at a party or in places they don't belong. And from that came the first TV show, and then the movies in the 90s, and then spin-offs and spin-offs and spin-offs. So everyone knows the Addams family now. But who is Charles Addams? Charles Addams is actually related to both John Addams and Samuel Addams along the way somewhere. And he had a wonderful childhood, and he even brags about this in some ways and even tries to avoid it sometimes. But he was very successful. He made money and had success from making cartoons for the New Yorker. He was respected and loved. He had a lot of women who wanted to be with him. He was attractive. And as you'd expect, a life that's just kind of nice is somewhat boring to read about. And it's very sad to say, but he didn't have that many hiccups, at least for the parts that interested me. I wanted to know if he drew on something from his life in some way. Now, that said, he did have incredible creativity, and I think this shows in the way he draws and in the Addams and his other cartoons as well. And he had a fascination with things macabre and dark and mysterious, and he would draw a lot on things like, you know, the Victorian Gothic, and he did have a fascination with cemeteries and death. So I think in many ways he's an interesting person, but his biography as a whole didn't kind of keep me going. So then the next person I picked up, and this is a person I really wanted to know more about, was Edward Gorey. So I picked up Born to be Posthumous, and very similar to Addams, Gorey is purposely mysterious, but he is also just eccentric in some way. Like, he really enjoyed dressing up in random fashion. He really enjoyed having cats and not showing up to parties and being kind of secret and mysterious. And when I say mysterious, I mean, like, if someone asked him a question, he would either give different people different answers or just avoid the question entirely. He loved the ballet very much. And, you know, he was present in some literary circles. The author kind of leaves it a little bit ambiguous, too, as to whether or not he was in a partnership with another man at some times in his life, or if he was completely asexual and not interested in anyone. But he never married. He never was interested in anyone that we know publicly. They're just speculations. And this book kind of focuses more on his growth as a character. So the book kind of very funnily starts that when he passed away in 2000, a lot of people thought that he was a Victorian man and that he was long dead. But it turned out that none of those things were true. He kind of maintained this aura around him because of his drawings and because of his artwork. He's also an extreme prodigy. Like, he begins reading early on. He's reading classics when he's in like grade 1. He goes to Harvard. Like, we're talking like super nerd. So he's overall just a cool person. Like, I think if I were to want to hang out with either him or Charles Addams, I think I would very much like to hang out with Edward Gorey, because he sounds like a fun person to be around and just watch him be. Like, I would watch his vlogs every day. You know what I mean? The last book that I finished reading is called The Young H.G. Wells, Changing the World. And this is a partial biography. It looks at the early years of H.G. Wells. And what I loved most about this one is how detached it felt from my world or from the contemporary world, because it is going further back into the mid-Victorian period, and you get to see different parts of Great Britain, and at the same time you see different class systems and different struggles, and some that are so detached from what the world looks like now that it made things a little bit more interesting. But also thinking about how limited something like science fiction was at the time, and how great of a creative mind you had to have to really project into the future. At the same time, he was living around the same time as Jules Verne, so you have science fiction kind of picking up a little bit of speed, you know. We're a few years away from the earlier days of Frankenstein, but now we have sci-fi that's progressing with more technology in a way that's a little bit different. You kind of ask yourself, for someone to think that way, what did he read? What did he enjoy? What did he think about? How did he get some of these ideas in the first place, given that he was among the first to do what he did? So this book kind of dives a little bit into that. So you get chapters about his schooling days, his kind of early reading. And I really enjoy books that tell me what other people read. I don't know. I guess it's just the booktube experience. It's probably why you're here, right? It's like you enjoy listening to other people's reading journey, and there are components of that in here. Obviously, this could be 10 million pages longer, but for what it was, it did its job, and it was pretty good. I think I'm done with biographies for just a little while, but I'm open to new ones in January or after the new year starts. But for now, I think this was a good start. I am kind of plodding through this one right now, which is Faith in a Seed by Henry David Thoreau. It is nature writing, and you know, it's a little bit more a slow burn than Walden. I'm nowhere near finishing it, so I'm just gonna mention it, and then I may or may not review it later on. We'll see. I have a few more Thoreau ideas out there that I might want to make videos on. I've learned a lot from him over the years, and I think he's very important in my reading life and in my nature appreciation life. So that's it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you in a future video. Bye!